Okay, I've started to record. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this eLN webinar on the principles of learning design for the virtual classroom. We are joined by the lovely Jo Cook, who you can hopefully see waving at you through your screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to hand over to Jo, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and welcome to this eLN webinar. So there's two events going on today. There's one in Manchester in the UK, and there's this online one. So you've got double goodness from the eLN, and I'm just really proud, really pleased that the eLN have asked me to do this webinar. So hopefully we will have a great time together. There's a hashtag eLN event. If you'd like to go and share questions, thoughts, something that you've picked up from today, then please go and use #eLN event, and you can also go and follow me on Twitter if you want to. So I'll paste that into the chat window. This is me, I'm Jo Cook, and my company is Lightbulb Moment. And what we do is we go and actually teach people how to deliver virtual training sessions. So how do you design, how do you deliver for a webinar or for a virtual classroom? And it's a little bit different from face to face. So that's what we are focusing on in our organisation. What we are looking at today is going to be just making sure that we can use the online tools, first of all, so that we can communicate with absolutely everybody, and then we'll get into the topic. So let's make sure, first of all, we can open up the chat window. So wiggle your mouse around and you'll get this menu up at the bottom of your screen. And if you haven't already, please click on chat. Now, depending on how you have your screen set up, it will either come up on a panel on the right, or it'll be a square that you can move around, and you can play with that and choose how you want to have that up and running. So I'd really like you to have that, because then we can interact with each other. So please make sure, I don't think you've got the everyone option today. You've got the option called all panelists and attendees. And that makes sure that I see what you've put on chat, but also everybody else can see what you've put on chat as well. So please make sure it's all panelists and attendees. And once you've done that, just put a word or two in the chat window. What do you want from today? What is it you want to get from today? Because you're here for a particular reason. You've signed up and you've got an hour of either breakfast time or lunch time or afternoon. And I'd really like to know, what is it that you want from today? So this is the agenda of what we're doing, but what are you here for? You've seen the write-up. What is it you want to get out of the next hour? It could just be your breakfast or your lunch, and it's a great way to spend that time. But what specifically are you thinking, yeah, I'm here for this, and that's what I want? Dawn says, I want to get over myself and start doing more e-learning. Oh, Dawn, that's a great way of saying things, get over myself. I love that. And getting over yourself, that's not easy. I've had to do that quite a few times, Dawn. But basically, you'll hear what I think. What I'm hearing is you're here to get some ideas, get sort of a bit more into the topic, and that's absolutely great. Jane says, hello everyone, I love learning and always keen to pick up tips and tricks. Well, hopefully we can help you out, Jane. And Lizzie says, to learn more about virtual classroom design. Well, funnily enough, you're in the right place, Lizzie. That's exactly what we are going to be talking about. And if you're thinking, hang on, Jo hasn't read out what I've written, maybe you haven't set the chat to all panelists and attendees, so just double check that. So L&D Paul, you've got it set to all panelists, so I can see it, so I'll read that out, but please change it to all panelists and attendees, and everybody can see it. So no problems, Paul, but Paul says, we're developing some virtual training. Our system is WebEx, which has some good interactive functionality. It really does. But we need to design our content to take advantage of that. Absolutely, you do. Clay says, I'm here to learn new tips and tricks on how to deliver online content. And Natalie says, hi all, I'm trying to specialize in instructional design. I've been a skills trainer in higher education for 10 years, but it's time for a change, and also better work-life balance, which we were talking a little bit about beforehand. So some great things that you've got there. Please keep using that chat window as we go through. I promise that I'll see it and comment, and we can discuss. You can use that to discuss with each other, with me, and also to ask questions, share links, and all sorts of other stuff as well. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to turn my video off for now so that we can concentrate a little bit more on what it is that we are doing. Oh, I've gone a little bit quickly there. Paul, yes, the session is being recorded, and Michael will be able to share some of the details of that, and yes, you'll be able to share that with your colleague. So first question, what is instructional design? Natalie asked what that was, or mentioned it, sorry, in the chat. So please put something in the chat window. What is instructional design? What does that mean to you? So what is instructional design? And if you don't know, it's absolutely fine to put don't know, not sure, because that's the whole reason we're here, is to learn things from each other. And I want to learn things from you as well. So Rob, thank you, Rob, says designing e-learning. I think a really good point there is it's about designing learning. I'm going to take the E part away, because actually we can apply it to face-to-face learning, e-learning, virtual classroom, all sorts of different types of learning. So well done, Rob. It's about the design. Dawn says it's creating ways of helping people learn. Yeah, really good, Dawn. Paul says, Paul, you're still on all panelists. You need to look at that drop-down menu and choose all panelists and attendees. But Paul says taking the content and delivering it in an impactful way. Impact is a really good point that you're making there, Paul. Thank you very much. So keep coming in that chat window if you want to, as and when. I think your answers are absolutely spot on. Admola says, instructional design is the use of various learning theories and methodologies to make learning effective. Great answer, Admola. And that's something we're going to come on to kind of in just a little bit. So this is a quote that I've got from you, for you, and this is from Jane Bozarth. And Jane's absolutely great, lady in the States, and she does all sorts of stuff around learning. She works for the eLearning Guild now. And she says that design is finished when there's nothing left to take out. So what do you think about that? And Natalie said that as she understands it, it's using the pedagogy of learning for effective learning, online or otherwise. Love that point, Natalie, thank you. So what do we think of this quote? Design is finished when there's nothing left to take out. I really like this, but not everyone always agrees with me. And that's, you know, I let them get away with that sometimes. So what do you think on this? We're going to go into a poll in a moment, but I'd like to know what you think about this at the moment. Dawn says, less is more, maybe. Yeah, I think so, Dawn. I think that's pretty much how I think of it, is that actually we need to leave stuff out so that we've got space. Lizzie says, I like it. Clarity is very important. Oh, Lizzie, I think you're absolutely right there, because we need to be really clear about what we're delivering, what we're wanting people to do, because training really is about doing something and that behaviour change. Nick says, it's true that we often try to do far too much. Yeah, I really agree with that, Nick. And sometimes it's us and sometimes it's other people. I'm sure we've all had that experience where somebody says, could you just add this to the training? Or can you just cover this policy as well? And I bet you've all had that experience too. And Clay says, concise for sure. Thank you, Clay. Nick says, but there are other aspects of design too. There are, Nick, so tell us more in the chat window. And Paul, yes, you've got all attendees now. Brilliant, Paul. First design question. What do I want people to know or do differently? And don't overload with theory. Love that, Paul. And Dawn says, could you just, is the thief of productivity and good design. You are spot on there, Dawn. And okay, and Mona's making a really great point about the difference between pedagogy and andragogy. And if you don't know about those terms, that's okay. You can just go and Google them, and there's some interesting discussions about the differences there. What I've got available for you is I've got a free, completely open forum for virtual classroom and webinar discussions. And I've started a discussion about this very point on that forum. So there's a link there in the chat window. If you just click that link, what it will do is open up in your browser for you, and you can come back to it at the end. And go and share your thoughts there. Do you agree with this? Do you disagree? Start that conversation about maybe pedagogy and andragogy there as well. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to be concise. We need to make sure what we're doing there. So let's find out a little bit more about you at this point. So what Michael's going to do is open up our poll. So have a look at the poll that you've got on screen, and please put an answer in there. So have you yourself delivered any webinars or virtual classroom sessions? It could be 1, could be 10, could be 100, I don't know. So maybe you've just delivered some webinars, maybe it's just virtual classrooms, maybe you've done some of both, maybe you've done some but only a few. Maybe you're thinking, well, what on earth is the difference between a webinar and a virtual classroom? And maybe you've done none at all and you're just here to start your journey. All of those things are good. So just go and click in there for me. And Michael, once all the answers are in, or we've got enough answers, I'm sure you'll share the results and we'll see what comes up, Michael.
Just going to give everybody a couple of seconds. We have 11 out of the 14 attendees have voted, 78%. 85. Somebody else has just found that window. Yeah. If you wiggle your mouse at the bottom of the screen, like Joe says, you'll hopefully find the sections for opening up polls. And whilst looks like we may have 2 abstaining.
Well, whilst we just have those last 2 people, Admola asks, virtual classroom, synchronous or asynchronous? Because I've developed a number of e-learning courses, but not live. So e-learning is slightly different. I've actually got a video on my YouTube channel about what I think the difference is between those. So e-learning is absolutely right. You're right. It's asynchronous. You learn it kind of as and when you need to. Whereas the virtual classroom, it's a little bit like what we're doing today. It's synchronous. It's a live session. So really good question, Admola. So what have we got as the answers? What are you seeing here, Michael?
So yes, the vast, well, a 50-50 split between both or none at all. So quite a split in the current audience.
Ah, okay. So we've got a very broad audience. And I'm interested to know then a little bit more about your experience that. So if it's you that's delivered that, in this poll, I'd like you just to tell me, are you the person that designed it, or maybe it was someone else? And Michael's going to open up another poll for you. So if you delivered a webinar or a virtual classroom, are you the person that actually designed your session? So in the meantime, also in the chat window, we have Michael Cook, who's my business operations manager. And what he's done is shared a link to our YouTube channel. So Admola, especially for you, but also anybody else that wants to have a look at it, it's me just talking for a few moments about what I think the difference is between e-learning, as those modules that you can go and take, and the virtual classrooms. That's my take on things. So again, you can click on that and come back to it a bit later. So if you haven't delivered any webinars or virtual classrooms, but you're here today, in the chat window, just tell us a bit more. Are you nervous? Are you worried? Is it you just haven't had a need? Or tell us a little bit more in the chat window. And if you have delivered any of those webinars or virtual classrooms, please use this poll to say who designed it. Was it you? Was it you and you've noticed actually there should be quite a difference and maybe that's why you're here today? You didn't design it, or maybe you didn't design it and gosh, you wish you had for a variety of reasons, or it could be another answer completely. So let us know in the chat window if you haven't delivered a webinar, why is that? And if you have delivered a webinar or session or virtual classroom session, was it you that designed it?
I think on the second poll, we have 9 people, which I believe are the 9 people who have delivered a session before. So I'm going to close that poll now and I shall share the results.
And Dawn says in the chat window, what holds me back? How long have you got? A combination of the fear of digital dad dancing and of it all going horribly wrong. Oh, Dawn, I do appreciate that. And Natalie says, I've not had the opportunity in roles up till now. And Clay says, I haven't delivered any session, but I'm looking forward to doing so in the coming months. Well, that all sounds good. And Dawn, this is part of your journey to go from digital dad dancing to digital diva, I think.
Can I just add that I don't see anything wrong at all with digital dad dancing.
Actually, my other half runs a disco, like party disco company, and he calls it DDA, which is Dad Dancing Aloud. There
Absolutely.
you go. Okay, Dawn, Digital Diva, that one's for you. So what have we got in the results here? So was it you that designed your session? So about half of the people that have delivered have said, yes, I did. Some of you have said yes, and I noticed how different it should be. So if that was you, please put in the chat window, what have you noticed should be different? If you've noticed the design of your face-to-face session and your online session should be different, please share what you noticed. Some of you are saying, no, you didn't design it, and there's an other. So please let us know what other is, and we'll go from there. Because I think it's really important to understand what those differences are, and what's getting in the way of us doing this. So Joe, hello Joe, says, not had the opportunity until now, but a great desire to make the most of these types of lessons. Love that, Joe. And you know, even if you haven't had the opportunity till now, what you're doing by being here is just broadening your understanding and your thoughts, making connections with other people. And you can always share in chat. I'm just typing in now my Twitter handle. If you're on Twitter, share your Twitter handle so that everybody can have a chat and get to know you. And Joe Harvey, when you wrote about the opportunity, you've written that to all panelists, which means that only I see it. Joe, where that chat window is, if you change that to all panelists and attendees, what you're going to do is share that with absolutely everyone. And Simon Garrett says, sorry, other was mine, not tried it as per my comment above. Understood, Simon. Thank you very much for letting me know that. Okay, so this is all about kind of those differences and what we've got to do. And one of the things that we need to think about when we are focusing on our training is what our goals are. So you're all sharing your Twitter handles there. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. So go and follow each other, go and follow me. What I'd like to know is have a think about the training sessions that you normally do. And what's a good example of the kind of learning objective that you might write? So what's a good example of the kind of learning objective that you might write? So just an example of one that you do for the company that you work with, one for the organisation you work in, one for a particular client that you're working on at the moment, perhaps. So what's a typical kind of learning objective? So what's a typical kind of learning objective that you might go and use in your face-to-face or normal learning sessions? So just notice that what I've been doing in the chat window is that I put a line of asterisks when I ask a question. So that's a great way of me being able to say, I need to go back to that part of the chat window, and that's where the question was that I asked. So it gives me a kind of a break point there. So Dawn's suggesting things like to prioritise the right tasks, to communicate effectively in face-to-face meetings and on conference calls, liking that. Clay says, I'm in the planning stages and comparing various techniques. Oh, excellent, Clay. So maybe this will help you a little bit. Rob says, how to coach, train the trainer, strategic decision-making, virtual delivery using, is that management of information reports or marketing information reports to make decisions and commerciality? Thank you. Ajmola says to effectively write business reports. Excellent. And Joe Harvey says systems training, how to use a new system proficiently and train the trainer. All really good examples. I'm really liking what it is that you're saying. And Simon says to carry out tasks safely. Oh, that's always an important one. So if we have a look at what we've got on screen here, what's wrong with these example goals or learning objectives? So by the end of the training, you will. And what's wrong with these? I think this is a poor example of learning objectives. So you might agree, you might disagree, but what's wrong with them?
I love the fact that the first two comments involved the word "ah" in the comments. Jane and Dawn, absolutely.
You're absolutely right, guys. Who can judge understanding? It's subjective. It's hard to measure. Yeah, I understand lots and I know lots. It doesn't mean I do lots. And that's a problem. You're right, Joe, it's too vague and it's subjective. So Joe Harvey, just make sure you set that chat to all panelists and attendees for us. L&D Paul, you say, what are you going to do differently afterwards? Exactly. That's the problem with this. And so what we've got to be aware of is that, you know what? Instruction doesn't cause learning. We talk about designing learning, but really what we're doing is we are designing the circumstances whereby people can go and do something, where they are in a place where they can learn. And that's really important as a difference. So again, I've got this kind of conversation going on about the design and what causes learning on that forum. So do go and let's get into this kind of conversation a little bit more, because just because I've built the training session, it doesn't mean that you are going to learn something from it. I really hope you do, but if I've designed it poorly, you're not going to learn anything. So if you're getting into design a little bit more and you're looking at how can we be a bit more specific? How can we make sure that what we're doing is really geared to what people are doing, exactly as Paul says, what are they going to do differently afterwards? Then actually action mapping by Kathy Moore is probably a good place to go and start. Have you heard of action mapping before? Just put yes or no in the chat window. Have you heard of Kathy Moore's action mapping before? Just put yes or no in the chat window. And what I've done there is shared a link to some podcasts that I did. I was really lucky and got to interview Kathy Moore about the topic for Training Journal. So go and have a listen to those if you haven't before. So it would give you a really good insight into why it's important, but it's some of the things that we've been talking about already. So loads of you haven't heard of it before. Some of you have, which is great. And Rob goes, well, there we go. I learned something, Joe, which is brilliant. So she's got a brilliant website, great book, great resources. And it's all about making sure you're focusing on what people really are doing at work. So definitely go and look up that and listen to those interviews if you haven't already. So this brings us on to theories that were mentioned a little bit earlier on. And there are loads and loads of different theories in learning, in psychology, in behavior, and these are just a few of them. To be a great designer and facilitator, we don't actually need to know all of these in detail. We need to know a little bit about them. But it's more key is what we actually put together from theory into action. And Michael's gone, wow, yeah, you're absolutely right, Michael. I've put a link there so you can go and have a look at that diagram yourself if you want to, and it's a really useful diagram. This is something that I really like. This is from Steve Wheeler, and if you don't know who Steve Wheeler is, you should definitely go and follow him on Twitter, and he's got a brilliant blog and a great book called Learning with Ease, as in kind of electronic learning and being digital. And what he says is pedagogy is in its purest form, describes the leading of students to a place where they can learn. What do you think about that? Is that your job? Is that your job to bring people to a place where they can learn? I see it that way, about creating that environment. And Michael, what was it you were saying about this picture when we were looking at when we did our run through?
I appreciated the literal metaphor of horses being led to water. And by the looks of it, they are drinking of their own accord.
Yeah, well, that's definitely what we hope for, isn't it? That's definitely what we hope for. So I really like this because it's all about us making sure that what we design is a place where people can come together to learn as they need to. And another part of this is, Natalie saying she agrees, thank you, Natalie, is social cognitive theory. And if you have a look at this, it's basically saying, well, a huge amount of what we learn is actually by observing others. It's their social interactions, it's their experiences that you're learning from. And you can read a little bit more about this from the e-learning from elearning.com, sorry. And Nick says, yeah, and to lead them in a way which, as far as possible, means they do learn. Yeah, you're not dragging them, you're enticing them, aren't you, Nick? You're absolutely right. With social cognitive learning theory, this is about making us feel connected. So we are virtual at the moment, but we're not remote. We're still together. Hopefully what you're feeling through the chat window, through the conversations we're having, is that we might be physically remote from each other, but we're actually all here together and learning something, and from each other as well. It's not just from me. I don't want it to be a complete lecture just from me. We should be learning from each other. And it's how we then facilitate our group, people, a team, a company in this virtual world, whether it's through meetings or forums or virtual classrooms or webinars. And Simon says, most definitely a valuable part of learning. I really love that. Thank you very much, Simon. So let's look at this a little bit more with our learning theories and focus on this point from the theories. And I'm going to pick out just two of these. So one is cognitive learning theory. So this assumes that learning is influenced by psychological factors and those things that affect your brain. Also, what we've got is behavioral learning theory. And this is kind of a bit like, actually working on the basis that it comes from stimulation in our environment. So we've got two distinct theories, and they go together to come with that social learning theory. And it was actually Albert Bandura that came up with that. I'll pop his name in chat for you so you can see it. It's one of those I have to have written down. I haven't got memorized yet. So Albert Bandura came up with the bits of cognitive and behavioral theory and put them together. So what he says is that social learning is actually based on four main things. One is the environmental factor, learning by observing others. So if you've got kids and they've used a swear word, you know that they've copied the adults around them. You know when you're doing peekaboo and then your child is using their hands to do peekaboo as well. All of those kind of things, they are learning from what's around them. We can do that consciously and kind of go, oh, they're doing it that way. Maybe I should try it. But also we do that unconsciously as well. I know, so my brother, he uses the word like a lot in conversations. So he says, like, I was going to the corner shop, like, and I bought this, like, and I find it really annoying. Yeah, it is really annoying, Natalie. But what I notice is after I've spent a weekend with him, I come back and my other half says, you're saying like all the time, just like your brother, because I've picked that up unconsciously. So there's a lot that we learn from our environment that's going on. Also, we have retention of information and processes that's been learned. So we actually kind of have to remember them, and that's a cognitive process. It goes on in the brain. And Michael says, is he from the Northeast? Like, no, he's not. And the other Michael Cook, who is my brother and the one I was talking about and is listening to this, he goes, yeah, it's like really annoying, like. So we have the cognitive processes of actually laying down our memories. And then there's the reproduction part of it. So this is where we actually have to be able to go, well, I've observed it, I've processed it in my brain, but actually I need to now go and do it. So that could be playing the guitar. It could be making sure that you print the report as a PDF by clicking the correct buttons. It's reproducing that action. That's a cognitive thinking process. And then the other part that we've got, which is from both theories, is motivation. How many of you know you should be going to the gym, but you don't quite have that motivation? You're not quite there. I'm going to say me too. And if you've met me, you know I definitely need to go to the gym. Rob is saying me too. Yeah, okay. So we know motivation is a huge part. Michael's just said, it's like you've read my mind. It's a universal thing. We all know we should be doing more. So let's pause for a second here and just look at this. Is a different way of looking at social learning theory from Julian Stodd. And what he sees with this approach is that formal learning, the way he looks at this is largely being a bit more abstract. It's largely a lot more around knowledge. And we know that great training interventions focus strongly on the performance of people at work, But we do have to acknowledge that this is often outside of the workflow. So it's that little bit of a challenge that we take people out of the workflow into a classroom or a virtual classroom for formal learning about knowledge and theory, but actually they've got to go back into the workplace and do this. And there's just, what Julian is saying here is actually with social learning theory, where you're discussing and on forums and you're doing this more informally, you're actually making links and you're actually applying that learning a little bit more. So I've done quite a lot of talking there. Let's have a think. And where do you already apply social learning? Or where do you want to? So think of your clients, your training sessions that you're delivering, whatever it is that you're doing already. Where is it that you're doing this already? Or where do you think, oh, I really want to do it on my program that does such and such? So what are you thinking? So with this social learning theory that we're talking about, where are you doing this already? And where would you like to? So Michael, you said, would it count if you're using some sort of buddy system at work? Tell us a bit more about that, because I think it would probably count.
Yeah, just thinking about, when I've worked for larger organizations and part of the kind of induction process for new colleagues, as you already mentioned, there is a certain amount of formal learning required that does actually impact on their day-to-day job. We will bring them into a classroom, we will sit them down and we will tell them what they need to do without necessarily actually going away and practice. But what we can do and have done in the past is used a buddy system where we'll give them some time with someone who already knows how to do the job, so they can watch them, observe them, start to sort of learn in bite-sized chunks the processes that they need to become competent with.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, kind of cementing the formal stuff, the classroom-based stuff with actually, yeah, more of a social interaction where they're actually out there in the real work environment that they are going to work in, doing the job, but being closely supported by someone who's already competent.
That sounds pretty much to me like social learning. I really like that. It might be a small aspect, it might be just one part of it, but yeah, that sounds great to me because you're getting them together to do it kind of in real life. That's excellent. Thank you, Michael. Michael, what else is going on in the chat window?
So we also have, Joe says it's on our Yammer page. Okay, so that's an interesting one. Yammer, I believe, is a bit like a old-fashioned MSN Messenger for businesses, if that's correct. Simon uses case studies, lots of discussion and experiences. And Joe mentions communities of practices. That's interesting. Let's have a look. Brainstorming situations. How do you experience conflict at work, which Dawn's mentioned. Jane mentions at the coffee machine. Does that count as social learning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the epitome of social learning.
At the coffee machine. And Rob's mentioned Paul Matthews and his informal learning at work theory. Was that on that diagram that you showed a slide or two ago?
No, it wasn't on that, but Paul writes a lot for training journals, so he might have written something like about that on trainingjournal.com. So Paul Matthews is from People Alchemy. He does loads of great stuff.
Okay. And Natalie said that she's just set up a placement learning program for uni students that includes blended learning and with workshops of the theories and practices they'll need in the professional environment.
And they're out there on placement. That sounds great. And L&D Paul says, as part of a leadership program, we have an interview with a leader to learn from their leadership strengths and how they apply it in work. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Michael. And the communities of practice, that sounds like a good one. And that's part of what we've got our virtual classroom and webinar community for, Natalie, is that we want that to be a community of practice so people can go there and say, how do I do this? What questions do I have? I need to do an activity on this. What ideas have you got? this went really badly, please help. Or this went really well, and actually kind of help each other. Oh, and Michael shared a link there to it. Thank you, Michael. So that's the kind of thing. And all of those ideas, you're absolutely right, are around social learning and getting people talking. It's less about that formal delivery part. We're not doing a lecture on the history of blah, when actually we should probably be giving people a video, some information, a bit of content in a session, really focusing on what they're going to do and that support that they need in work later on, and the performance support for that. So all sorts of bits that we can bring together there. What we're going to have a look at now in the last sort of half-ish of the session is bringing this together for the virtual classroom, because that's why we're here. All of what we've talked about is really important for any learning intervention. Face-to-face, webinar, e-learning, performance support, communities of practice, virtual classrooms, but now we are really going to hone in on what we're doing here. So what we're going to have a look at now is actually bringing all of these things together. So what we've kind of focused on so far is we're kind of bringing together in our funnel here. We've talked about our learning objectives, and you all came up with that brilliant stuff at the beginning, that things like to know and to understand are just terrible learning objectives. So they need to be action oriented, and something like Kathy Moore's action mapping is a really great place to start with that. Because what we need to do is go, well, what are our attendees going to do back at work, back in their office, their workplace, back on the shop floor? What is it that we need them to do afterwards? And now, once we know all those things, now we can look at the virtual classroom part and go, well, what technology have we got? What techniques can we use? And now we can come up with the ideas that we need for our virtual classroom. So let's assume you've designed a virtual classroom session, you've put it together, and maybe you're the person delivering it, and you start delivering it and you've asked a question, but there's no response. There's nothing in the chat window. There's no maybe green ticks or hand up icons. There's nobody scribbling on the whiteboard. There's nothing. It's like tumbleweed. In the chat window, just share for me, what would you be thinking? What's your reaction? You've asked the question, and it goes by, like 5 seconds goes by, 10 seconds go by, and you're thinking there's nothing. So what's your reaction at this point? You asked a question, there's no response at all. What's your reaction? What are you thinking? So Lizzie says, ask the question in a different way. That's a great point. I've had lots of experience with that myself, Lizzie. I've got a particular question I use in some of my sessions, and for some reason, every time I ask it, it makes no sense to people. So I've obviously got to rewrite my question. Paul says, maybe they didn't understand. Great. Simon says, rephrase. Brilliant. Michael says, is anyone actually listening? Yeah, that's a really great point. Either through a technical issue or just because I've bored you all and you've gone away. Maybe there's no one listening. Paul says, maybe the content isn't engaging and really good. Natalie's response would be, ah! really honest there, Natalie. I think I would feel the same sometimes. James says, give some examples. Yeah, so we could kind of give some examples to get the ball rolling, which would help clarify the question, give people some ideas, some guidance. That's a really good idea. Paul says, maybe there are technical issues. Yeah, I can't tell you the amount of times I've been on mute and talking to myself, and then all of a sudden somebody puts in chat, Joe's gone silent, which usually is a good thing, but yeah. So it could be technical issues. Natalie says, rephrase. Rob says, same as in a coaching session, embrace the silence. That is so right, Rob. You might have noticed, and one of the reasons I put my webcam on was I asked you the question and then I just paused. Had a drink. And give you that time to think, reflect, and type. You need that time to do the typing. Simon's response would be help. You understand that. Clay says, I'd reassess how I'm presenting the content. Absolutely. Joe says, lose a bit of confidence. Oh no, Joe. And that's what we want to avoid. We don't want to do that. Rob says you could cold call. So in a virtual classroom, we could say, hey, Michael, what do you think about this? And all of a sudden Michael would go, oh my God, I've got to unmute and answer. So you could do that if you do it nicely rather than meanly, but yes. Adamola says, I'll sip my cup of tea and ask the question again. Perfect response, Adamola. Dawn says, I like the way you give some examples while waiting for us to chat. A good strategy if there's tumbleweed. Absolutely. Paul says, WebEx can tell us if participants have switched pages to another browser. Check that and call them out. Yeah, it's a nice function in WebEx, Paul, where it comes up with a little red exclamation mark next to somebody's name in the participants panel. I would be just slightly careful on that, because it could be they're Googling something. It could be that they're translating something in another language. I mean, it might be that you've bought them and they don't care, but it could be those things too. So I would just be careful of going, oh, Bob, you've clicked on something else, you know, not do it that way. But you're right, it's a useful piece of information. What else have we got? Rob says, I didn't notice the colour glass. Oh yes, they're my kind of, oh, what would you call that? Like diesel colour. I can't remember the name that you would use for that. Unicorn or mermaid is a nice way of describing it. Iridescent, I think that's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. So Nick says, always make sure there's someone online with you who's briefed to give a first answer. Lots of people don't like to be first. That can be really good, Nick. In maybe a webinar, you can have a plant. So you've probably seen Michael Cook in the chat window. He's kind of my plant, if you like, today. So if there was tumbleweed, hopefully he would put something. He's just said hello there. In a virtual classroom with maybe 8 people, you might not have that kind of possibility, but yeah, in a webinar or something. Thank you, Michael Ditchburn, as well. And what else have we got? Paul says, webinars like this are a good example of how to run them. You need a producer on the bells and whistles in case of technical issues, then a presenter can focus on their bit. That is a really good way to do things. You are absolutely right. So what we've got here is some of the issues we have are that actually we've got quite a remote audience. We can't see each other and we can't see the whites of their eyes. We can't see, you know, maybe they're bored and they're on their phone kind of just doing whatever else. We can't see any of those things. So actually we have to get over the fact that we can't see people and that we have a remote audience. And the absolute best way to do this is with interaction. It's so important to get people involved and engaged in the session. And I've got a couple of questions about this because I think this is important, but I want to know what you think is important about this. So let me turn my webcam off again. Let's go and focus a bit more on our chat window. Why do you think interaction in a virtual classroom session or a live online session is so important to attendees? So you're attendees in the webinar right now. So you can tell me from your experience in this session right now, why is this so important? We've had the interaction today. It's been the chat window. We've had a couple of polls. We haven't got some of the other things. We haven't done any whiteboards and bits and pieces, but we have had lots in the chat window. So why is it so important to you as attendees? Michael, what are people saying?
So we've got Rob starting off with their ability to express their opinion, being critical. And Natalie mentions we're all social beings, and it's natural. It is absolutely natural to want to interact with another human being. I think it sort of humanizes the process. If it was all delivery, say from your side of things, we could be just watching a YouTube video rather than actually having an experience of what it is to actually attend something like this, a webinar. We've got Asley, hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly there. We've got saying that it keeps them engaged, yes. And Simon thinks it's good to know that you are connected. And most of the, allowing people to reflect and general comments on engagement.
Yeah, really good. Thank you, Michael. And Dawn, that's a great point. Active equals learning state. Inactive equals unlikely to learn. So that engagement piece and connection, the social piece, it all goes towards learning, remembering, encoding what it is that we've done. You are absolutely spot on about all of those things. Clay says interaction is critical for sharing information with each other. Absolutely. And Nick says you think far more when working out what to contribute than passively consuming. I love that, Nick. Thank you. Great answers from everybody. Michael Cook has just shared a blog that I wrote. I wrote it in a slightly controversial way of 8 reasons to remove chat from your sessions. It was a bit more tongue-in-cheek about why you should remove it, but basically it's a blog saying why you should have chat. So you can go and have a look at that. And Nick, I really like that point about working out what you're saying to contribute and the connections that we've been talking about. So I attended a free kind of course recently from a vendor, and it was on something to do with marketing. And I thought, well, I'll go along and have a look. They've got like 3 free sessions. I'll see what it's like and see whether A, I learn anything, or if I like their way of doing things, I might go and sign up for the full price one. And what I found was they didn't have a chat window. And I didn't like that because it put me into listen only mode. And there wasn't really anything for me to then go and engage with other people. And when their salespeople phoned and said, basically trying to hard sell the full priced course, I said, well, no, because you don't have a forum to discuss with other people that I'm in a cohort with or a group with. You don't have a chat window. So how am I supposed to interact with people? And their response was, well, why wouldn't you just want to learn from the expert? But what you're highlighting today in the chat window is actually we're all experts. We can all go and apply things in different ways. And the way that you ask something or you share something, it makes me think about things in different ways as well. And Natalie's just gone, blah. Yeah, that's pretty much was my response, Natalie. It was a very polite thank you, but no thank you. Because that was what makes things so short. And there's loads of research about this. And Natalie says it's a very conceited and arrogant attitude. Yes, I completely agree with you. And above that in the chat window, Jane had said that the engagement keeps her engaged, not distracted. However, if I'm also working whilst on the webinar, it is difficult to keep up. I'm not able to give 100% unanswered questions. Best to avoid juggling. Yeah, you're right, Jane. And it depends what you're coming along for. If this session today is absolutely vital to your professional development to go and focus on this, then of course you're going to give 100%.
Jo, can I just dive in and quickly ask a question that I am genuinely interested in to do with what Jane has just mentioned and what you were talking about there. Quick straw poll, which I haven't prepared a poll for, if you could just answer in the chat. How many of you have ever attended a webinar such as this or something else and done something else at the same time? So I'm genuinely interested because what I'm expecting to see is probably people like myself who have attended webinars and tried to do something at the same time and realize that you've just attended an hour-long webinar that you learned absolutely nothing from because your mind was somewhere else. So yes, it's good to see that it's not just me. Just wanted to check. Thank you, everybody.
Great question there. And this is about what we want to put our attention to. So if today's really important, you'll put your 100% attention to it until I bore you and you decide to go and look at your emails. Dawn says, yes, I painted my nails during one recently. And Natalie said, well, I've just baked a cake and I've put it in the oven. Natalie, as long as I get a piece of the cake, I don't mind. And Joe says, I've tried to, but struggle to multitask. So you're right, it's because our brains can't multitask really. If you're listening to something and then you've got to read an email, technically, I'm not even a stereotypical male joke or anything like that, but technically your brain physically can't listen to me and read your email at the same time. It has to choose one or the other, just because of how it processes language and words in the brain. Jane says several, but always try to give Joe 100%. Or Jane, that's just because you are lovely. And Clay says, I always try to stay engaged, even when stuff was boring. Oh, I'm sorry, Clay. I hope that wasn't today. Natalie says, I should add, I wasn't bored with the session, just very pushed for time. Oh, Natalie, I didn't take it that way. Don't worry. And that's the joy, though, of things like your smartphone or your tablet, is you can prop it up next to you whilst you're doing the cooking or whatever it is. That's a great way to do it. And because your brain was engaged in a physical act rather than necessarily, you know, reading email, you would have been able to pay cognitive attention to it, Natalie. So I think that's a great way of doing things. Let's ask another question now. It's one of my last questions that I've got for you today. We've talked about why interaction is important to you right now as attendees, and you gave great answers. But why is it important to a facilitator? So why is it important to me right now today? But also when you're thinking about designing and then delivering your virtual classroom sessions, maybe you've only got 8 people in your session, why is it going to be important to you as a facilitator? So why is it important to you as a facilitator to have interaction in the session? What have we got coming up, Michael?
So we've got Natalie starting with being able to assess the students' learning, and Dawn, similar sort of thing, check in with the participants and what do they think. Lizzie doesn't just want to listen to herself. Fair enough. Yeah, so, and Simon agreeing, you know, that check really that people are actually engaged and learning. Yeah, and yeah, Joe's got the same sort of things. Confirm understanding, keep them engaged and learning from everybody. And, you know, my own personal thoughts would be along the same sort of lines, to check to make sure that, you know, people are engaged, they are learning, and give them the opportunity to ask any questions or raise any topics as well.
Absolutely spot on. Really love all of those answers, and yours as well, Michael. Thank you. Because it's, if we have this interaction, if we ask those questions like I've done today, you can assess what people are learning. You can check in with what people think. You can make sure they're engaged. And by doing that, we tailor what we're doing. If all the answers you were giving to me throughout our session today were super basic, then obviously I have to deliver what I'm doing in a different way. They haven't been super basic today. You guys have been awesome. So that means our conversation has been slightly different. I had planned, for instance, to talk a little bit more about the goals part and the, you know, the understand and the know. But by asking you the question and you guys saying, oh, understand and know, you can't measure it. There's no, you know, you can't know that that's working and all of those things. Do you know what? That saved me a 3-minute lecture to you to tell you that, because you guys know it already. So it meant we could move on to something else. Natalie says that you might get a piece of cake. Thank you, Natalie. So Clay, I like that point as well. I can cover topics that are valuable to the learners. So, you know, if we're asking things and saying what's important to you and how are you going to apply this and what challenges do you have in your organisation, then it just means that we might skip a few topics, we might do it really light, we might go to town on one question. So it's really important. And Dawn says interaction means the facilitator isn't hogging the mic or the attention. You're absolutely right, Dawn. Though it can feel kind of weird, because even in virtual classroom sessions, I'm probably doing 90% of the talking. I'll admit that. And anybody who knows me knows I like talking. But actually what I'm doing a lot of is reading out the chat, just like today. So hopefully, if you measured where the attention is, it might be me doing the talking, but it's me reading out your stuff. So hopefully the attention then is on the attendees, on the learners, rather than on just me spouting or espousing what I think. So you're really right about that. And Natalie says, tailoring, yes, face-to-face, I aim to be flexible. So it's obvious that this should be the same for e-learning. And I'm just going to upgrade you to virtual classroom there, Natalie, because e-learning traditionally means like a module of self-paced click next to learning. But you're absolutely right. And there's no reason why you can't do that in your virtual sessions, just like you do face-to-face. So this is a webinar today. It's a little bit different, but in a virtual classroom, we would have had, you know, microphones open. We might have your videos on. We would have you drawing on the whiteboard, all sorts of other things. And that makes it interactive and flexible. You're absolutely right, Natalie. So one last quick topic that I want to go on to before I round up and hand back over to Michael. And this is, all of this is really great, but we need a way to be able to deliver our sessions. And this is with the facilitator guide. So you all will have your own version of a lesson plan or a facilitator guide or document, and how you want to do that. And what I've just shared in chat with you is a link to my blog where I share my template. So you can go and download this template and read a bit more about it and make it right for you. Hash it about, add things in, take things out, redesign it if you think it's rubbish, entirely up to you. But have a look at this on screen. This is how I write my facilitator guides. What is it, my pleasure, Jane, what is it that you are observing here? What can you see that you're thinking, oh, that looks good? Or maybe you're thinking, why is that there? Or are you thinking, Joe, really? What is it that you're seeing and liking or disliking or just observing? What is it you're seeing here about this facilitator guide? Jane says it's organised. It really is. So Jane, I'm a bit of an all or nothing person. I'm either super organised or it's a complete mess. But with my virtual classroom sessions, it needs to be organised. You're absolutely right. And Jane says me too, and Natalie. So it is organised. Dawn says the guide is great, completely clear about who's doing what and for how long. Thank you, Dawn. I'm glad you've seen that. Michael says, love the specific nature of what needs to be done, when and how. Yep, that's what it's there for. Admola says it's quite detailed. Admola, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm assuming it's a good thing, but it might not be. Natalie says, I like the red important points. Yeah, they're the questions. So, you know, you can see text written here. I don't read it out as a script. Maybe on a bad day, I might read it out as a script. But I don't tend to need to read that out. It's there in case, you know, if I drop off today, someone can carry on because they've got the facilitator guide. But the red are the questions. What's the bit I need to ask people at this point? Clay says, yes, impressively organised and time sensitive. Yeah, online work is very time sensitive. A minute here or there can make quite an impact, especially in shorter sessions. If you've only got 30 minutes, 45 minutes or an hour, you can easily go off topic. The colour to differentiate the item, says Jane. Nick says good visual prompts. Yeah, that's really important, Nick, that you've picked that out. Because as I was saying earlier on, the brain can't process different verbal things at the same time. So as I'm talking, I can't read. I can't do those things technically at the same time. But pictures are processed in a different part of my brain. So when I look across at the very first one, where it says, it's got the script and the question, why are you looking at using live online sessions? It's got a picture there of the chat pane it's actually from WebEx. I just need to look at that picture and know that it's to be done in the chat panel rather than on a whiteboard or whatever. So really good point there, Nick, thank you. Clear and detailed, anyone could pick it up, that's the point, Joe. Adamola says it's a good thing, it can be picked up by anybody and the delivery will be the same. Absolutely, Adamola. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's worked in a number of places where you have to, for whatever reason, take over somebody's training session and you just look at the materials and go, what am I supposed to be delivering? What goes on here? What's this activity? And it becomes a mess. L&D Paul says, one thing I'd add, especially I'm designing training that others will deliver, is what the key point is I need to get to, how to line up and move on to the next session. Really good point, Paul, and lots of people do that way. And I see one way that you can do that is have a section called the transition, where you say, so next we're moving on to, and so on and so forth. I don't do it that way for me because I feel each session, each slide is a key point in itself, and the text that's there should highlight that in and of its own right, and there shouldn't be too much on each slide. But it is a way of doing it, and as I say, it's about doing what's right for you and your organisation, so that's a great point. Natalie says, my lesson plans look like this, and I was getting to the stage when I was thinking that they were too detailed and over the top. Thanks for the confidence boost. Absolutely my pleasure, Natalie, because this is about when you're doing something, you need the detail. If I'm coming in because you're off sick, Natalie, I need that detail to know what your plan is, and it can't all be in your head. And with a webinar or a virtual classroom session, you've got the technology angle as well. And Paul says, some of my facilitators worry about the group discussions and how to keep control of them. So the key point helps them to have more confidence to let others talk. Absolutely brilliant on that. Really like that. So it's all about what's right for your organisation. And at that point, I am going to stop because I think we're pretty much at time. My final point is it's all about bringing technology and people together for success. And just whilst we're wrapping up, I'd really love to know, what is your light bulb moment from today? What have you got from today? What have you learned from today? So please share that in the chat window. And I'll also share with you that link to our virtual classroom community. Again, you're all more than welcome to join. And so, Michael, over to you whilst people are just sharing what it is that they've learned today.
Hi everybody, we're back. Thank you very, very much, Joe. That was absolutely brilliant. And as we discussed before the session started, this was actually something I was genuinely interested in as well, as someone who hasn't ever really delivered a virtual session before. I've got a lot from that. So thank you again. Hopefully everybody's noticed that there is an evaluation poll. If you could fill that in just for our benefit, that would be fantastic. Make sure that you add in the chat function your various different light bulb moments. Just a few points of business. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now, so this should be interesting.
Oh, so let me stop sharing mine for you. There you go.
There we go. I'm going to try. Oh my goodness me, my desktop is horrendously messy. So I did kind of hope that I could just share. There we go. Google Chrome. Let me share that just so you can see just a few points there. Hopefully you can see that. Just a few notes about some of the upcoming stuff from the eLearning network. You can see that we have another webinar in a week's time on the 27th of July, which is all about your first e-learning project. So for some of the people who've attended today, that might be useful as well, if you've not really sort of got into it as yet. And also probably the most important thing to mention at the moment is that our eLN Connect, our yearly conference, is available for booking. And it's on the 15th of November this year down in London, and we have a dedicated website, which you can hopefully see the URL at the top. So that's elearningnetwork.org/ELN-Connect-2018. And right now, if you go to the site, you can see only 117 days left to book your space. You can actually get an early bird offer as well of only £80 plus VAT to actually attend, and that's available to anybody.
That is really cheap, and it will be a great day. I'm 99% sure I'm going, so I hopefully to see some of you there.
Yes, also myself as well, where I will be dressed slightly more smartly. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. So once again, thank you very much, Joe. Thank you everybody for attending, and I think we shall end it there.
Thank you. Bye.